Midwest Grain Products is the country's main supplier of whiskey for brands that do not distill their own whiskey. Now, you might ask yourself, well, how many other brands are there that are doing this? It's estimated that close to 130 different whiskey brands are currently using MGP sourced whiskey. Welcome in. We are the Bourbon Brothers, and this is the Liquid Courage Show. Tonight, we're going to work really hard not to go long, but we have a lot to talk about as we break into a new bourbon and break down the second episode of Season 2, Sons of Anarchy. To help me do that, I want to welcome in my co-host. He is my co-pilot in this tailspin we call a show. He's still broadcasting deep below the frozen tundra at Heinz Field. Ken, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great. How about yourself, John? I'm a little depressed. We got some bad news today from the groundhog, and it looks like there's going to be 6 more weeks of winter here in PA. So I'm going to be buried here in the basement. So I'm really looking into distracting myself from that news.
Well, stock up on the firewood. Make sure you've got plenty of bourbon, and we'll buckle in for some Sons of Anarchy and some Liquid Courage show. How's that sound?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
All right, so we have so much to cover tonight. So without further ado, let's drop the gate on this one. Now, if you are new to the show, the format is simple. First, we kick things off with a tasting and discussion of a spirit, usually a bourbon, and we will continue to enjoy said spirit throughout the remainder of the show. As for the remainder of the show, we're going to focus on a specific episode of a favorite television series where we will start with the pilot and we're going to work our way through episode by episode to the season finale. Tonight, we're going to be discussing Season 2, Episode 2 of Kurt Sutter's Sons of Anarchy, titled Small Tears. For those of you that are watching the show on YouTube, I want to let you know that we published the show in 3 parts. You are currently watching Part 1, which is the perfect part to start with. And we're going to cover the bourbon tasting, and then we'll get into Parts 2 and 3, which will be the discussion of the episode. So please be sure to like this video and then subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a single show. Also, someday, Tom Jones will stop playing What's New Pussycat 24 times in a row, and you're going to be back at the gym, in the car, on the bike, and you're going to want the audio version of the show. So be sure to get over to your favorite podcast platform like Apple or Spotify, Stitcher, and about 14 others, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast version of the show. Also, we want to hear from you. Let me say that again. We, as in Ken and I, want to hear from you. So send us your praise, your questions, your hate comms. Let us know how we're doing, what you like, what you dislike, and probably most important of all, what you'd like to see more of on the show. You can leave your comments in the comment section of this video, or you can email your question to us at ask@bourbonbros, that's BROS.TV. And if your question doesn't suck, we might even answer it on a future show. And with all of that out of the way, Ken, let's move to my favorite question of the show. What are we drinking tonight?
What are we drinking? Okay, well, last week, we selected Redemption. So I'm going to turn around and grab this.
All right, while you do, Redemption has a few different varieties. We have gone with the, what is this?
It's the
bourbon?
The straight bourbon whiskey, Redemption Bourbon.
Straight bourbon whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Redemption is actually, we'll talk a little bit more about this as we get further into it, but they're mostly known for their rye. That's kind of their flagship, not the straight bourbon whiskey. But this was the one that we both could find, so we've gone with that. While you work on getting that open and poured, I'll go through kind of the quick download of the details. So again, Redemption straight bourbon whiskey. It is a straight bourbon. I believe I paid about $28 for this bottle.
Yeah, I can't recall what I paid for, but it doesn't seem like it was much more than that. Maybe in the mid-30s.
Okay. So a little bit on the lower end of kind of your, let's just say not rare bourbon. Company is the Deutsch Family Wine and Spirits. Distillery is out of Midwest Grain Products. Release date's ongoing. This is an 84 proof bourbon, so it should be a little more on that easy drinking side. Average age of 2.5 years. So you will, because it's not more than 4, you'll actually see that listed on the bottle. as required. So there is that age statement. So this is a little bit of a younger bourbon, but it is aged in new charred oak barrels. Mash bill, 75% corn,
Ooh, okay.
21% rye, and 4% malted barley. So this does have certainly a higher corn for that sweetness, but it's also got a little bit of a higher rye percentage in the mash bill. So I would imagine you're going to get you're going to get a little bit of that sweet note, but you're also going to get some spice.
Okay, I'm looking forward to that. I got to say, just my experience so far with the quality of the sealing job that was done is just, I'm a big fan. The bottle, the cork is nice. It was solid.
So you feel like you've got a quality product?
Yeah, I got a quality product here. I'm happy with the glass. Right. It's thick. They're not skimping at all on this.
So this isn't like the mellow corn with just the plastic screw cap.
No, it's not. It's not.
Okay. All right. Good. So while you get that poured, let me give you the summary, aka marketing speak. This bourbon was carefully crafted to highlight the classic flavors of the highest quality bourbons, a true reflection of America's native spirit. The high amount of corn gives this bourbon a classic sweet taste with notes of vanilla and caramel from the wood, while the rye adds some light spice flavor. Bottled at 84 proof for a lighter experience, this bourbon is great on the rocks or in mixed drinks.
Okay.
So it's interesting. I said this is probably going to have a little bit of a lighter drink to it at 84 proof. I also said that I thought the corn would give it a bit of a sweeter note, but the rye would bring in some spice. That is exactly what they've said in this summary. So I think we've deciphered the mash bill and proof appropriately.
Well done. Well done.
All right. I'm going to start with just a nose. And I don't know if it's the placebo effect, but this definitely has the nose of a lower proof bourbon to me.
Yeah, I would agree. It's definitely lighter.
Yeah. And I would imagine at 2.5 years, you're probably not going to get nearly as much char as something that, like, when we were doing the 10 years, you get a little more of that
yes.
deep amber color. This is a little bit of a lighter bourbon in color. And that might be why they add more rye, is to bring more flavor since it's not been aged as long. But let's raise a glass and see how it tastes. Cheers.
Cheers.
So to me, this drinks like an 84 proof, 2.5-year-old bourbon. I suspect that they lower the proof a little bit because it's so young, because you can definitely get a little bit more of that alcohol taste, more so than you would expect for 84 proof. And I think it's because it's so young. You're not getting that deep char and smoke in this. It's a much lighter taste.
Yeah, I would agree with you. After letting this set in, I maybe I compare it the Elijah Craig. Do you remember that? It seems like it kind of
has a little more burn than it should.
And it doesn't usually, when they come on and then it kind of goes away and it gets clean again. This seems to be hanging on a little bit longer. At least that's the way, that's what I'm getting.
I agree. So it'll be interesting to see if this changes a little bit as we let it rest and sip on it, let our palate adjust. But this is an interesting bourbon to talk about, Ken. Now, neither of us really knew anything about it when we bought it. We didn't put any research into it. And frankly, just to be transparent, we were just trying to find a bottle of bourbon that both of us could find locally. And this one came up, right?
Yep.
So this was the winning lottery ticket. Once we had it, I did do some research, and this is essentially a company that is largely known for wine, that wanted to get into the spirits business and launched this bourbon brand without even having a distillery.
Really?
Yes. Now, on the one hand, it almost feels like, therefore, it's not a real bourbon company, right? It's like they're buying some bourbon, slapping their own label on it and selling it. But if you and I were to go into the bourbon business, that's probably how we would start too. So I can't really blame them. Building a distillery and distilling bourbon and then waiting for several years before you can even sell it is hard. So they're basically outsourcing that production. So Redemption was founded by Dave Schmeier and Michael Canbar. I don't know if I pronounced those correctly. Before it was acquired by Deutsch Family Wine and Spirits. And Deutsch Family Wine and Spirits, again, mostly known for wine, they own Yellowtail, they own Josh Cellars, they own Layer Cake. A lot of the wines that you can kind of widely find in just about every store across the country comes from them.
All right.
And they recently entered the spirits business. And so all of the Redemption whiskey is made by Midwest Grain Products, which is more commonly in the industry referred to as MGP.
Okay. All right.
And Midwest Grain Products is the country's main supplier of whiskey for brands that do not distill their own whiskey. Now, you might ask yourself, well, how many other brands are there that are doing this? It's estimated that close to 130 different whiskey brands are currently using MGP sourced whiskey.
So MGP would be the equivalent of a generics branded type of distillery.
Yes, they're obviously largely making whiskey to spec, but they're working with brands like Bulleit, Templeton, Whistle Pig has some of their whiskey made by MGP. And you'll remember Bulleit was originally made by Four Roses for a number of years. And then we talked about how that eventually ended, but we didn't know where it went. And it looks like MGP is now who makes bourbon for Bulleit. The other interesting thing is MGP is not in Kentucky.
That is interesting.
They have 92 buildings on 300 acres in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, which is just north of Kentucky. And it was originally established in 1847. So it's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
The distillery was formerly owned by Seagram's, and MGP didn't fully take over that property until 2011 after Seagram's had gone out of business. So they acquired the distillery and named it Midwest Grain Products and started distilling bourbon. And yes, most of it's white labeled.
Wow.
What I also found fascinating is that although they do a lot of different styles of whiskey and bourbon, they're most known for rye. That's kind of their claim to fame. In fact, it's estimated that they produce over 80% of all American rye.
Wow.
That shocked me. And so it to me doesn't come as a surprise to learn that Redemption's flagship whiskey is not the straight bourbon whiskey we're having tonight, but in fact, their rye and their high rye. They're known for their ryes, which makes sense. They're having MGP make it, and MGP is known for rye whiskey.
Okay.
Redemption does say that although, and I will give Redemption credit, they are very transparent about their relationship with MGP. It's literally listed right on their website that MGP makes their whiskey. Most companies do not disclose that, and MGP has a reputation of being very secretive regarding the relationships they have with different brands. So if you want to make a bourbon or a whiskey and you don't want people to know that you're outsourcing the production, MGP is the perfect place to go because they'll do that for you and they'll keep it on the down low.
Okay.
But although MGP does distill Redemption's whiskey and Redemption's very transparent about that, Redemption does say that the whiskey is bottled in their facility in Bardstown, Kentucky.
Okay.
So I suspect that at some point the barrels come from Indiana down to Kentucky and then they
bottle it. And they put these nice fancy corks in here too that are nice and tight. I like the presentation. So you mentioned that MGP, am I saying that right? MGP?
Yep, MGP.
That they are known primarily for their rye whiskeys.
Yes,
bourbons.
and not to be confused with GHP.
No, absolutely not. we won't do that. Okay.
If you know, you know.
If you know, you know. Do you know what makes them so good at rye? Did you do any research into that?
I did because I couldn't believe that they made 80% of it. So it begs the question, why them? So it's a fantastic question. And they've been known for making rye for a long time. And it's believed that kind of what led to them being so successful in the rye market is a combination of things. So the distillery sits directly on top of an aquifer that provides a pretty consistently cool 56-degree water supply. So they have, because they sit on this aquifer, they have a constant flow of water, right? So in terms of wanting water for distillation, that's convenient.
Okay.
But it's also a cool water that is fairly consistent. And so the combination of that cold, reliable water supply, they'll use that not only for distillation, but they'll also use it to cool their equipment, right? So much like
okay.
radiator in a car, they'll run that water and through that equipment and keep that equipment cool. Cold water is key to kind of maintaining and controlling fermentation and keeping consistency. And rye is one that tends to be more temperamental and really requires that consistency. And so much of their quality, specifically around their hallmark rye, is attributed to this aquifer that provides limestone filtered water that is relatively consistent in temperature from the Ohio River. And so it's kind of optimal for making rye whiskey.
Wow. Okay. Well, the great answer, great homework. I learned a little bit. I feel educated tonight, so this is great. Is there anything else we should cover here before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I found all of this interesting as well, and I didn't really know anything about Redemption until we ended up deciding to purchase a bottle. As I'm sitting here kind of almost through my first glass, my initial takeaway would be fine for a cocktail. I would not label this a sipping whiskey.
I would agree with you. I mean, now that my palate is adapted to it, like I feel like I could continue drinking it because I'm acclimated. But I would agree with you. It's a cocktail bourbon.
And once you get past the initial kind of heavy alcohol that you get, and again, I'm assuming it's because it's a young bourbon because the proof isn't that high. It kind of has a watered down taste to me.
It does. And it, like you said, it's light. I mean, if you can look at it, I mean, it is light.
Yeah. It just not as much flavor there.
Right.
So I think particularly if you wanted to make a whiskey based cocktail that doesn't taste like whiskey, this is your jam. If I was going to do something like a Manhattan or an old fashioned where I really want to taste the bourbon, I still wouldn't choose this for the cocktail either.
That's fair.
But that's my... Now, hearing all of this about MGP and how much they're known for rye, I would be willing to go back and pick up a bottle of the Redemption rye or high rye and see how that is, because obviously it sounds like MGP knows how to make a rye whiskey.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like they have those specs pretty hammered down. They know what they're doing there.
Yes. Now, I do have one more thing before we wrap up, and that's a quick announcement for, what are we up to, 12 fans? Is that what we settled on?
Yeah, the last I looked, we were at about an even dozen, maybe a baker's dozen now. We might be up to 13.
Okay. All right. Well, we don't want to stop on that. We at least want to keep it in even numbers. But one of the things we discussed when we started the show was our desire to want to appeal to fans like you and I, right? That love the show. And we really wanted to try to create a community where we could kind of celebrate and discuss the episodes that we love the way that you and I do when we get together.
Mm-hmm.
And so with this in mind, we're starting kind of a new recurring series on social media, and we're using the hashtag Reaper Table, right? So hashtag Reaper Table, all one word. And the spirit of that name and why we came up with Reaper Table is, as we all know in Sons of Anarchy, the table is an iconic part of the episode, right? Everybody that is a fan of Sons of Anarchy knows about the table.
That's where all the plotting happens.
Yes, and we know that in every episode there's church. And so people, the club come to the table to discuss club business, but it's where they can debate decisions that need to be made. They can weigh out pros and cons. They can argue, they can vote, and they make decisions, right? So it is a place where they meet for discussion. And so that idea really embodies what we're trying to do with the hashtag Reaper Table, which is we want to pose questions to you, the fan, to come to the table and share your thoughts, right? So just like in an episode, we want to meet at the table and we want to have spirited debate and discussion. And so you can look for that hashtag Reaper Table on our Twitter, our Instagram, and our Facebook. And the types of questions we're going to be asking is like we recently talked about the fact that Tig mistakenly shot and killed Donna. And now you can see that he's living with that guilt. So one of the recent questions that we posed under the hashtag Reaper Table was, how do you think that guilt and that mistake influenced Tig's decisions in future episodes throughout the series?
Yeah, it's a great question.
And so this is an opportunity for people to weigh in with their thoughts and bring up specific scenes or episodes that maybe lead them to believe that this has influenced Tig one way or another. So it's just an opportunity for people to share their thoughts. If you have suggestions for the Reaper Table, please send those to us. Again, ask@bourbonbros.tv, and we might feature your question in a social post and get some spirited discussion and debate over it. But we think it'll be fun. It's a great way for all 12 of our fans to get involved and get engaged with us. And we're curious to hear your thoughts because these are the questions Ken and I ask each other when we talk about the show.
Right. So send them over. We really appreciate that. Let's kick this thing off.
All right. So that is going to do it for part one. Next, we are going to get into our discussion of Sons of Anarchy, where we will cover season 2, episode 2, titled Small Tears. Once again, quick reminder, please like and subscribe. Check out our channel for more shows, but more importantly, top off your glass and come along and join us for part 2. It's all coming up next on the Liquid Courage Show. Stay with us.